Everyone, so today I want to talk about annotation. This is going to be something that we will be discussing over the next few weeks of class. I want to show you different ways that annotation can help you in your various classes and various disciplines and not just in English classes. So today I'm going to start with just some very big picture approaches to how to do annotation just to get us started. Over the next few weeks, we'll also visit how we can tailor our annotations for different kinds of reading and different kinds of classes. So first of all, what is annotation? There's a few different ways that you might have heard annotation referred to in the past, or that you might hear annotation referred to as in the future. Phrases like writing in the book, taking notes on the page, or a favorite among English teachers, reading with a pencil. It basically all comes down to scribbling on the page as you're reading stuff that's hopefully useful to you as a reader. I like to think of annotation as a few different things. One, active reading. So making that shift from reading as a passive activity where you're just sitting, letting information come into your head, to that to making reading an active activity where you are a participant in the reading process. Another way that I like to think of annotation is having a conversation with the text. So in the next few weeks, we'll start talking about rhetorical moments and the ways that, all moments of reading are communication. All acts of writing are communication. And so the author is communicating with you by writing. Annotation is a way for you to talk back as you read. Why do annotation? Well, I already got into it a little bit to have that conversation with the author, but why is that conversation important? First of all, processing. Sometimes you will encounter readings that present you with a lot of information, sometimes very complex information. And the nice thing about annotation is that it allows you to work through that information, process through that information as you read it. And so sometimes it helps you find definitions, or sometimes it helps you think through a difficult concept. But annotation is a way to process the information that's coming into your brain so that your brain can better receive it. Activating. It also helps you activate a different part of your brain. So you use some skills in reading, some skills in writing. Activation empowers you to use both of those skills and the parts of the brain associated with them at the same time. That in turn creates remembering. It helps you remember the text better when you've activated all of those parts of the brain and you've processed all of that information. That leads to better retention. So especially when you are reading something that you're going to need for an activity or for a classroom conversation or for a test, annotation is a great way to help put that information into your short and long-term memory so that you can access it and do well in all those endeavors. So we've talked about what annotation is. We've talked about why you should do it. The rest of this video is just talking about the how. So if you know that you should be taking notes on the page, what should those notes be? We are going to start off with 6 things I want you to do as you are reading a text. From there, we are going to move towards tailoring these notes for different kinds of reading and adding a few helpful things to them, but I don't want to overwhelm you with too much right now, so I'm going to give you just 6 things to pay attention for, and then we'll go from there. So the 6 things that I think are important. First of all, definitions. Often throughout college, definitions are going to be very important to you. I know that when I took tests in my college science classes, there'd be sections where I'd have to define certain things sometimes. I had history tests where 20 to 30% of my grade was just my ability to identify terms and define them well. And so, as you're reading, being able to pick up on things that are important definitions or words that you don't recognize. This is another helpful thing to do. If you don't recognize a word, being able to make a note of what it means in your margin. That might require using the internet or a dictionary, but finding that definition can be super helpful. And I'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to the definition slide. Next one, context. So context can be really important, especially when you're reading for literature or sometimes for the social sciences. So context can mean places where something matters, places where context matters. So you're reading something and you know, because you know something about the author or when this was written, you know that a specific historical event or cultural event really matters here, even though it's not directly brought up in the text. And so being able to make that connection to something outside the text can be really helpful. So if I'm reading something and it mentions in an offhand remark the Tennessee Valley Authority, for example, I know that that has to do with the New Deal. I'm going to go into that and like write a quick note saying, you know, like connect this to so and such, and help me make that broader connection. The other thing is context clues. So sometimes you will pick something up in the text that helps you learn context or helps point to context. And so that's another place to make a note about context. All of this will be broken down into various bits in the next few slides. Predictions. So one of the great ways to interact with the text as you are reading it is to predict where it's going. This can be from the title, this can be from an abstract or a summary or a little blurb at the beginning of an article. It can be from the introduction of a book, even from the back of a book, the little blurb on the back of a book. It can also be as you're reading throughout a paragraph, noticing a detail and from that detail saying, I guess that this article is about to say X, Y, and Z, or I guessing that this text is about to go to this or that place. That can be a really good way to process through material, to actively engage with it, and also it can be a fun way to keep reading, to be looking for something as you keep reading to see whether your prediction comes true or is subverted in some way. The next one, questions. Asking questions of the text, I think, might be the most important of these 6. This is another way for you to engage with the text. And your questions can take a few different forms. Your questions can mean that you are trying to clarify something, that something doesn't make sense, and you write a question in the margin that says, let's make sense of this. The question can be questioning the text in that you are challenging the text. You're saying, what about this? You know, you're saying that we shouldn't do this specific political thing, but what about these details that seem to say that we should? How does the article respond to that? Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't. So various kinds of questions that you can ask during a text will really help you engage with it better. 2 more to go. Answers. So if you're asking questions, you should also be looking for answers as you read. And so sometimes the text will cause you to ask a question, and then a few sentences later, a few paragraphs later, you'll go, oh, there's my answer. That's another thing to take a note on. And lastly, and this is where students seem to have the most experience taking notes, key points. So when I'm reading through perhaps a book, I had a professor when I was in college who was a really firm believer in only taking one note per page of a book. I don't think this is the best approach, but I do like the fact that he had a method where he was forcing himself to focus on the one most important thing on the page and take a note on that. That requires you to do a little discrimination and a little bit of figuring out what matters the most. That's a good skill to have because there might be 6 things that are important. Being able to figure out the 1 or 2 most important is going to help you get the big picture of what's going on in the text. So for me, it varies. Sometimes I'll try to just do one kind of key point per page. Sometimes on a very dense and shorter document, I'll try to find one key point per paragraph. But finding that key point is going to help you capture the big picture of what is this article or book about. All right, I've given you a lot of information. This might feel a little bit overwhelming and abstract at this point, but in the next part of this video, I'm going to show you how this works out in terms of what it actually looks like on a page. So here's an example. So this is a paragraph that I took from a Victorian essay. So I tried to find something that might feel a little difficult, even for me as a reader, as someone who's read a lot of Victorian literature. This feels a little challenging. So this is the kind of thing that I would take notes on as I read it. The kind of text where I'd be looking for definitions, I'd be asking questions, I'd be making predictions, all of that stuff. So as you see on this page, and I will put PDF up for accessibility purposes. So if you need some help knowing what's on this page, please do look at that PDF. But I've got various things highlighted throughout here. You will notice that I do not have entire sentences highlighted. Okay, I've got one entire sentence highlighted, my key point sentence, but for the most part, it is 1, 2 words, maybe a short phrase. But you will notice that of this entire paragraph, only a few words are highlighted. I think that is super important because if you highlight everything, if you underline everything, suddenly that's going to mean nothing to you. You want something where only the most important stuff is popping out on you at a page. If every other word is highlighted or every other word is underlined, that stops being useful to you. So doing yourself the favor of being able to choose what's most important and highlight that is going to be really helpful. So for the assignment you're going to be doing later today, I'm only asking you to highlight and take notes on things that are definition, context, key points, questions, predictions, or answers. Just those 6 things. And I'm going to very much encourage you to, as you do your highlighting, to make those notes. We'll be talking about the software where you'll be doing that in a little bit. Only doing the words that are necessary. So if it's a definition, just highlight the one word. If it's a key point, just highlight the phrase or sentence that really captures that key point. If you're asking a question, just highlight the few words that caused you to ask that question. So you see here, I've got a paragraph. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 notes on it. That's a little bit more than you might have on every paragraph, but this is a longer paragraph, so I've got a few more notes. And I am going to now walk through what each of those notes is. I'm not going to worry so much about actually reading the paragraph to you. This doesn't matter too much about what the paragraph's about. I'll just tell you it has to do with the birth of democracy in the late 18th century and talking through he's comparing European democracy to English democracy, the rest of Europe to England. All of that doesn't super matter. What you really need to know is the kinds of notes that I'm taking, and I'm about to show those to you. So first of all, definitions. Definitions can be words that you don't recognize or words that are used in a way that you're not used to them being used. So I do a little bit of both here in my definition note. I highlight the word magistrates here. This might be a word that you don't recognize at all. So what I did, just imagining, say I don't know the word magistrates, I might go and look that up on Google or in the dictionary or somewhere, and I might find out that it is a civilian officer. Using the definition, I might reread the information. That's actually probably a really good thing to do. And I suddenly realized that I think magistrate's being used in a little bit broader of a term. This is an older document. Words change, definitions change. I think that Mill is using this word to mean general leaders. So I do a little bit of the work where I'm looking up a definition, but I'm also seeing if that definition makes sense here. And I'm doing also that work of, okay, that's what the definition means today, but what does the definition mean specifically in this context? So doing both halves of that is going to really help you actively engage when you're looking for definitions. Next slide. Key points. So this one, we're not working through this article as a whole, so don't worry too much about whether or not this actually is a key point. You can just take my word on it. But as I was reading through this, I noticed that this is about a move from giving leaders lots of power to do what the leader wants to asking leaders to care about what people want and making forms of government that work for the people. I don't think that the word democracy is actually used at all in this paragraph, but I'm realizing just by picking up that paragraph is starting in that place and moving towards that other place, this is a paragraph about a shift to democracy. So I find this sentence, and it says the nation did not need to be protected against its own will, and I'm noticing this is the point in the paragraph where that shift is happening. And that shift is the big idea of this paragraph. So I'm going to write KP for key point and write shift to democracy. All right, asking questions. This is, like I said, what I think is one of the most important things to do as you read. So there's a phrase here where it's talking about early democracy, and it says that they're trying to come up with a form of government that's convenient for exercise. I think convenience is a kind of interesting word to use for government, and so my question is, what about early democracy made it convenient? Maybe Mill will answer that question, maybe he won't, and that's a question that I'll think about outside this text. But that's one of my questions. Another one of my questions, this is kind of a question slash definition-y thing. You could probably call it either, but because I think that it also could be context. So this is a good example of how there's a little bit of fluidity between how you label your annotations. But Mill uses the term European liberalism. And I know from my experience that what Mill means by liberalism in the early 19th century is probably different than what we call liberalism in the 21st century. And so my question is, and this is a question that I'm hoping will get answered as I keep reading, is how would the 19th century define European liberalism? And guess what? As I keep reading, I think that I do find the answer, because the following sentence says, those who admit any limit to what a government may do, except in the case of such governments as they think ought not to exist, stand out as brilliant exceptions. So I'm seeing the phrase, like those who admit any limit to what a government may do. So that's actually what that he's contrasting with European liberalism. So I'm realizing, oh, you're talking about big government, basically. European liberalism is big government democracy. And then lastly, I have a prediction at the end of this paragraph, and that's not a bad place. The start and end of a paragraph is a really good place to make your predictions, because at the beginning of the paragraph, you're making a prediction about where is this headed. At the end of the paragraph, you're making a prediction about what comes next. So here, Mill is basically saying in the sentence I highlighted, a similar tone of sentiment might by this time have been prevalent in our own country. Basically, Mill is saying we might have ended up with the same kind of governments as we're seeing in France, for example. So we might be seeing similar governments as we see on the continent at this time, but we don't because of circumstances. And so Mill doesn't fully explain what those circumstances are, so this is a good place for me to make a prediction because I'm guessing that's where Mill is going to be headed. And so my prediction is that England is going to be contrasted with Europe because I'm going to predict that those circumstances are the English Civil War and the wars against America and France that recently happened. Again, this could also be a context note because English Civil War, wars against America and France are kind of me taking information I know about English history and using it to help me read this text. So that's all I've got, and in the next few items that you're going to encounter, I'm going to help you figure out how to do annotations through the software we're using on material that we're going to read this week. As always, send me an email, stop by my office hours. If you have questions, I'm always more than happy to help you. But I hope that this gives you a good start for where to begin with your annotations. Thanks, everybody. Bye.